Picture this. It's the final, bloody months of World War II. Allied command is sifting through mountains of intelligence, and they stumble upon a complete mystery. Something that defies all logic, all the numbers, something that turns everything they thought they knew about their own armies completely upside down.
So you gotta ask, right? Which Allied army did the German soldiers on the front lines truly fear the most? I mean, the obvious answer would be the Americans, with their overwhelming numbers and industrial power. Or maybe the British, right? Hardened veterans who'd been in the fight since the very beginning. Seems like a no-brainer, but it wasn't.
And look, the numbers seem to tell a very clear story. By early 1945, you've got this sea of American soldiers on the Western Front, over 2 million of them, plus more than 500,000 Brits. And then, way down the list, you have the Canadians, with just 180,000 troops, a tiny fraction of the total force. Logically, the army you'd fear most would be the biggest one, but that is not what the Germans were saying. Not even close.
87%. This is the number that just stopped the Supreme Allied Commander, Dwight D. Eisenhower, dead in his tracks. Out of every 100 captured German soldiers they interrogated, a staggering 87 of them said the soldiers they feared fighting more than anyone else were the Canadians, more than the British, and way more than the Americans. How is that even possible? So let's imagine we're in Eisenhower's headquarters. He's looking over these intelligence summaries, and this one report just doesn't add up. It makes no sense. He actually calls his intelligence officer in, points to the numbers, and asks, "Is this accurate? Is this a typo?" And the officer confirms it. It's real. They were getting the same answer from every interrogation center. This bizarre paradox was a fact. And this is what made it such a head-scratcher for Eisenhower. For every single Canadian soldier on the Western Front, there were 14 American soldiers. 14! German troops were consistently telling their captors that they were more scared of that one guy than the 14 others standing right beside him. Militarily speaking, it's insane. After he confirmed the data was solid, Eisenhower reportedly leaned back and said this to his intelligence officer. It was this moment of dawning realization. The Germans had learned a brutal lesson on the battlefield that Allied command was only now discovering on paper. This fear wasn't just an emotion, it was a weapon.
So, where in the world did this terrifying reputation come from? Well, this was not something that just popped up in 1945. Oh no. To really understand it, you have to rewind the clock all the way back to the mud and blood of the First World War.
It all started right here, at Vimy Ridge in 1917. The Germans held that ridge for years. It was considered an unbreakable fortress. The French and the British threw everything they had at it and failed. Then, in just 3 days, the Canadians took it. They achieved the impossible. And the German military, they never forgot it. For the next 20 years, German military schools literally studied Canadian tactics, writing them into their training manuals as the textbook definition of shock troops. This reputation was old, and it was deeply earned.
But, tactics from a war fought 2 decades earlier are only part of the story. The other part, the really crucial part, was the character of the soldiers themselves. The profile of the average Canadian soldier was just fundamentally different from almost any other army in Europe.
So what set them apart? Well, for starters, until the very end of 1944, every single Canadian soldier fighting overseas was a volunteer. They weren't drafted, they chose to be there. Most of them came from farms and small towns, guys who were used to hard physical work. Their training was legendarily intense, often using live ammunition in exercises that shocked their allies. And their motivation was powerful and simple. They were fighting to end this war so their own kids would never have to. And this quote just gets to the absolute heart of it all. The psychological difference is immense. See, most soldiers were fighting because they were forced to. But the Canadians, they chose to cross an entire ocean to get into the fight. And that difference in mindset creates a totally different kind of soldier, one who isn't just trying to survive the day, but one who is there to win and to get it done as fast and as aggressively as he possibly can.
So, you take this historical reputation for being shock troops, and you combine it with this fierce, individual motivation, and you create a fighting force that is just utterly relentless. And the Germans saw this, time and again, across every major battle in Europe. And the proof is right there in the German army's own reports. At Dieppe, a tactical nightmare for the Allies, a German intelligence officer wrote about their abnormal resistance, noting that they just refused to surrender.
In Sicily, German soldiers called them demons at night for their constant aggressive raids. On D-Day, they were the ones who pushed farthest inland from the beaches, because they didn't stop to consolidate, they just kept going. And during the horrible Battle of the Scheldt, a captured German officer said there was something wrong with those men, because they simply didn't recognize when they should surrender.
So what was the ultimate reason for this fear? It wasn't about having better equipment. It wasn't about having more soldiers. It was something deeper, something psychological and far more terrifying. It was the absolute, soul-crushing certainty of what would happen the moment you decided to fight them.
A captured German sergeant actually explained the difference perfectly. He said, if you held your ground against the Americans, they'd stop, call in artillery, and wait for support. If you resisted the British, they'd likely pull back, reorganize, and plan a more methodical attack. But if you resisted the Canadians, they would just keep coming, right away, again and again and again, until your position was completely overrun. It was that certainty, that relentless, unstoppable aggression, that's what created the fear.
You know, this fear was so real, so widespread, that German intelligence actually gave it a name: Canadian anxiety. Seriously, that was the official term they used in morale reports to describe the total collapse of fighting spirit in a German unit when they learned they were being transferred to a sector opposite the Canadians. The mere sight of that maple leaf emblem was a weapon of psychological warfare.
And if you need one person who embodied this entire spirit, look no further than Leo Major. The guy was sent to scout the Dutch city of Zwolle. Instead, he decided to spend the entire night running through the streets, firing his machine gun, throwing grenades, and basically tricking the German garrison into thinking they were under a massive assault. By morning, the entire German force had fled. Leo Major had liberated a city of 50,000 people. By himself. It's just an unbelievable story. But you know, maybe the most incredible part of this story is what happened when the war was over. These men, who fought with this unbelievable ferocity, they returned to Canada and just went back to their lives. They worked their farms, they ran their businesses, they raised their families, and they almost never spoke of what they did. Not out of shame, but because for them, it was never about glory. It was about sacrifice. It was about finishing a terrible job so the next generation wouldn't have to.
This whole story leaves us with a pretty fascinating question. We're so used to measuring an army's strength in numbers: how many soldiers, how many tanks, how many planes, but the story of the Canadian Army in World War II suggests there's another way to look at it. Maybe the true strength of an army isn't measured in its size, but in the absolute certainty of its will. What do you think?